Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet,
Ad Astra, the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in Science and Space Policy.
And I'm a PhD in Computer Science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast. So, Newton, what are we talking about today?
So today we're actually going to have a bit of a shorter episode, specifically focused on our latest from Washington section. We're going to talk a bit about the House appropriations bill that just came out this week. That's sort of our big news of the week. And our big space news highlight of the week, which is the National Space Council. We're going to talk about a little bit about China experiencing an anomaly on a launch pad in international news, and then a quick lightning round for latest in tech, where we talk about DARPA trying to launch smallsat experiments on an Indian rocket, and Space for Humanity seeking 10,000 citizen astronauts in our Coming Soon to Space section. So, Jack, on to the big news of the week: the House appropriations bill. What is it? What's it looking like for NASA?
Like you said, Newton, that's one of the biggest highlights of this week has been the appropriations bill that just got released in the House. So CJS, the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee of Appropriations, basically the people that fund NASA, released their draft legislation that funds NASA for the next fiscal year, which begins on October 1st this year. So this draft legislation is passed unanimously through committee. So it's going to be going on to the next stage, which would be full appropriations committee and then on to the House and Senate. Basically what this legislation says is, I mean, it's a huge FU to Trump is what my take on it is because I'm looking at these numbers and Trump released his budget in March, the skinny budget in March and the full budget in May. And he set the number at $19.1 billion, which was about a 1% cut over last year, the fiscal year 17 number. The House, they're the only ones who have released the text of their legislation. The Senate has yet to do that. But the House basically throws that aside and increases NASA budget. In an article in Space News, Culberson, the representative from Texas that represents Houston, talks about it's been long enough that NASA has experienced cuts, and it's time for us to double down on supporting our space program. So the new number to remember, everybody, is $19.872 billion for NASA.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty great. So let's kind of dive into it. Are there any details about specific increases to certain programs in the bill?
Not necessarily. So what the appropriations bill says basically is, here are the top level numbers that NASA will be funded by division. So NASA's broken up into departments, divisions, directorates. They all have different names.
Sure.
And so, aeronautics, education, exploration all have their different line item numbers in this in the legislation, which we've included in the show notes. There are very few cuts. The only major cut over previous years is in space operations, which is sort of the ground support systems and I guess administration of things that are up in space and monitoring. That's the only thing that sees a major cut, which even then it's only about $270-ish million, or $220-ish million. What the rest of the budget looks like, the House version of it, is staying either in line with previous years or a major increase. I mean, the only other thing that I see that's getting cut is the Office of Education, but it's not getting cut as much as the Office of Education under the Trump budget, which completely cuts the office and only gives it $37 million to finish out, basically the closing cost for the program.
Sorry, you were cutting in and out for a little bit there. No, I was actually going to say that I was reading through, a couple of just articles sort of summarizing the bill, and there were a few articles that had some speculations by congressmen such as Jose Serrano, who was criticizing cuts to NASA's Earth Sciences program, saying the bill provides $50 million less than what the administration requested. But they're not. But things aren't that specific in the bill, are they? They're not stating that these specific programs are getting cut or axed, correct?
Correct. I mean, this is the bill that CGS produced. It's a little bit over 100 pages long, and it includes 8 pages about NASA. I mean, this is their full appropriations. They don't do it by individual agencies or administrations, and they can't go into detail like that, like cutting this one office of polar research within NASA. I mean, this only talks about the top line numbers. So Representative Serrano probably is more talking about the, maybe not legislation, but talk within committee about cutting certain earth science programs and talk within the authorization committee about cutting certain programs. The budget here does not cut earth science because it doesn't go down to that level.
Interesting.
I'm not saying that earth science won't get cut in the future, because it very well could be. There's been a lot of talk on the Republican side to cut earth science. But this bill in particular does not go into programmatic level detail.
I see. So actually, the article that I was reading stated that there may be some sort of report that accompanies the bill. We'll have to check that out and maybe report on that next week. They say that it's going to be they say that it's going to be released prior to the markup by the full appropriations committee after the July 4th recess. So I think that's a sort of a coming soon to space. Maybe he was going off of information that might be in that report. So
yes. So congressmen get access to information well before the general public does, just so they can they're up to date and can make the most informed decisions. That might be likely, that there's a report coming out that's going to be talking about what this money is going to be spent on within NASA. But that's all we can go on right now is speculation. What this is from a space advocate perspective, a very good budget. I mean, NASA does not get cut. I mean, there are certain line items that do get cut, but it's not at the same scale of a couple $100 million, which is under the Trump budget.
Yeah, very cool. Well, very cool. Hey, you got anything else on the actual budget side or the actual appropriation side?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've included some links down in the show notes for on the House side and Senate side. They recorded the committee hearings if you're so inclined, and then also there's the actual text of the budget if you want to go through and look at the numbers and create fun spreadsheets like I have.
Okay, well, very cool. So on to the space news highlight of the week then. So word on the street is, and by word on the street, I mean Trump is going to sign an executive order stating that we're going to create a national space council. Jack, tell us about it. What is the National Space Council? Why don't we start out with that? Where did it come from? What's a little bit of its backstory? So
the National Space Council existed in 2 iterations prior to this new creation. So from 1958 to 1973, there was the NASC, the NASC, the National Aeronautics and Space Council, which all of this is based on. This was the thing that brought together the administrator of NASA, the vice president, directors and secretaries of defense, state, all of the different parts of the federal government that have any stake in space, brought them all into the same room to discuss these issues, and was, for the most part, fairly successful. I mean, a lot of people credit the National Space Council as one of the driving forces behind the Apollo program, because it was able to take a newly created agency like NASA and bring it into the fold with, departments of defense and, Department of State, these, pre-existing organizations that have all this organizational know-how, and bring these scientists and technocrats into it and really kind of bring them up to speed as to what the federal government is all about. The next iteration of the National Space Council was from 1989 to 1993 under H.W. Bush 41, he also enacted an executive order that created the National Space Council that brought together, again, Secretary of the Treasury, State, Defense, Commerce, and the administrator of NASA. The difference there is that the Secretary of, never mind. Tom, cut that last like 5 seconds out. But so the big thing about the National Space Council is it's supposed to streamline a lot of the organizational problems facing space and sort of bring everybody to the table. So sort of what our podcast tries to do is find those intersections between space and other sectors of the government and policy, that you can build these, I guess, unnoticed coalitions or these unexpected coalitions. The National Space Council of today is going to be headed up by Vice President Mike Pence, as per history. I mean, Johnson headed up the National Space Council under Kennedy. Dan Quayle headed up the National Space Council under HW. So this is probably the biggest space news highlight in terms of policy for the last year. Other than maybe the authorization. But even then, this is rivaling that. This is so sort of the three main takeaways that I've gathered, is that it's going to elevate the issue of space. So space has always sort of been in the background, and people within the space policy community and outside of it can attest to this, that space hasn't always been the priority of the federal government. Space hasn't always been the main driving force behind vice presidents or presidents' agendas. What this does, the National Space Council, is it elevates that issue to a level that's of national significance. I mean, it really makes it a major issue, I think, especially for the vice president, as sort of knowing his background. He actually has a very interesting affinity for space. I think it's because it harkens back to sort of this, the good old days where, straight white men defeated communism. But I think this really sort of makes space a priority for the administration, which is good for us space advocates, because then we're able to take this issue to other people within that coalition. So it's not just NASA that's involved in space now. I mean, commerce, transportation, all have their offices that deal with space. So this is going to allow us to find new avenues in order to make our case for humans to Mars by 2033, or, opening up more lines of communication with Mars. I mean, there's so many more things that we can do with the National Space Council now.
I can see its benefit in terms of helping us along with our deep space programs. But how do you think this is going to fare for Earth science? Like, in terms of just we understand. I'm not going to go back and reiterate the current administration's viewpoint on things like the Earth Sciences program, but just how much power does this give? How much power does this executive order give the National Space Council over certain decisions that are made by NASA, and could it have an impact on those Earth Sciences programs?
So an important thing to note is that the National Space Council, NSPOC, let's just keep calling it that, NSPOC does not set the budget. NSPOC sets policy. Okay. NSPOC is going to be the one that says, okay, these programs aren't working because it doesn't fit in line with this integrated approach to space.
Right.
I mean, that's essentially what this is doing, is creating a collectivized group within the White House. I mean, it grows the White House for an administration that's so big on cutting programs and unneeded personnel. This is creating a lot of personnel that maybe don't need to be there.
Well, that's
but it
my
really
worry.
Elevates that issue and shows that the administration cares about space.
But that level of bureaucracy is sort of my worry, in that it's giving this administration insight into NASA's activities that may not have necessarily been there before. So NASA could act as sort of, its own, not sort of independent entity, but it could operate on the same viewing level as the other agencies in the federal government. But now this sort of elevates it to being, this agency that is constantly being reported on to the president and the other members of this council. Is there a reason to worry here about programs being reported on that the administration may not necessarily be on the side of because of some ideological reason?
I mean, the national NSPOC is going to shine a light on all the things that NASA does and all the things within the federal government that happen in space. So, I mean, it's important to note that some of the positions on this on NSPOC are Department of Defense, Assistant to the President on National Security Affairs. I mean, there's a lot of parts of the federal government that deal with space. But I think you're right that there is need to worry if you care about programs that the administration doesn't like, because this is going to give them an opportunity to really set their sights. And this is sort of my second point, that what NSPOC does is it really jumpstarts the administration's space agenda. So if you're not part of that space agenda, like a lot of these earth science programs, even if you have allies in the House, even on the Republican side, that want to fund earth science programs, NSPOC is going to sort of circumvent that and give more power to the White House in making those decisions. So programs like the earth science program are going to see some pretty significant cuts. And if not cuts, a reorganization. Something that the administration has talked a lot about, advisors and the president himself, is that NASA should be focused on space exploration, not Earth monitoring, which you can make an argument for that. I've seen both sides argue. I mean, both sides, as in Democrats and Republicans, argue for and against it, that NOAA should be in charge of all things earth science. And I mean, that very well could be what the state of affairs looks like in 4 years, where you have all of NASA's earth science programs moved under NOAA. NOAA gets a budget jump. And NASA's focused specifically on our deep space capabilities, no longer really dealing with that near Earth or low Earth orbit. So yeah, I think there is reason to worry, but this also gives advocates of programs like that, like the Earth Science program, the opportunity to go through different avenues in order to get their needs met. So if you're really concerned about Earth science and you think that that you want to save it, and the only way that looks like it's possible is to go and put those programs under NOAA, talking to the people in the Commerce Department is going to be a better use of your time than talking to people in NASA. Because I mean, NASA wants to keep everything the same. I mean, it's an organization. Organizations don't like change very rapidly. And this administration has a propensity to make change very rapidly. So sort of making that argument with advocates on the commerce side saying, hey, earth science is important for commerce for X, Y, and Z reasons. This is why earth science should be moved from NASA to NOAA in order to maintain those programs, gets you what you want and also gets commerce what they want, while also helping out the administration. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, this is an administration we're going to have to deal with for the next 3.5 years. So we might as well take our wins while we can and use the avenues that they're opening up to further our own agenda, while sort of fitting it within theirs. I mean, it's a very tricky situation to be in, especially when there's an administration that denies that climate change exists or denies the usefulness of Earth monitoring for any number of reasons. So I think there is reason to worry, but there's also reasons to hope, because this does open up the doors for new avenues of advocacy. And I guess maybe my final point on NSPOC, the final thing that it does, this means that we're that much closer to an administrator being announced. Yeah. Which is really going to sort of change how we're going to be thinking about this issue for the next couple of years. I mean, if Bridenstine's the pick, and he very likely is, this is going to set the tone for the national space policy conversation for the next 3.5 years. I mean, this is a very interesting situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, something I kind of want to get your thoughts on, Newton, is with NSPOC, what is NASA going to look like? I mean, there's a reason why 6 of the 13 positions on NSPOC are defense or intelligence related. And that's, I think, harkens back to the Apollo program that sort of took advantage of the National Defense Organization in order to achieve civil space goals, sort of using defense to provide security in a way of the space program. So what do you think NASA could look like under NSPOC? Like what are the major changes organizationally do you think could occur?
I mean, I don't see major changes to NASA itself. I just see changes within those Defense Department organizations or IC department organizations. I would wager that the main focus of many of these upfront discussions, once they start to become a bit more mission based, is going to be things like protecting satellites that are in orbit, both from debris and other potential dangerous other potential dangers that are out there, whether man-made or otherwise. Protecting space assets, I know, is a big topic within the Department of Defense right now, as well as what in terms of high level. I'm going to keep it high level here. What purview we can have from space, what we'll be able to see. I think much of those capabilities are going to stay separate from NASA. I just think that it will allow for more coordination between those organizations as opposed to an actual change within those organizations. Now there's that talk about things like the Space Corps, which will certainly change defense, but I don't see major changes happening within NASA itself due to that. I just see.
So it's going to be between these organizations.
Exactly. I don't see some major structural organizational change coming specifically for that for those reasons, because we now have a National Space Council. I see just more communication between and more channels for communication between these organizations.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, NSPOC is going to be. It's going to be a concerted effort by the administration to set those space policy goals and strategy, basically. So we have this major program of getting humans to Mars. Well, what are we going to have to do to get there? There's all of these other steps that commerce can help with, or steps that transportation can help with, or steps that defense can help with, in order to almost sort of disperse the cost and responsibility across the different agencies and almost create a level of buy-in for all the other parts of the federal government that don't really have anything to do with space. But then suddenly, oh, this program of ours is dependent on space capabilities. Let's invest in this. I mean, I guess there's going to have to be a bunch of new authorizations within the various committees for commerce, transportation, defense, in order to meet the needs of NSPOC. But this is the first step to creating that national concerted effort for space exploration.
So I'm anxious to see what comes of this. So you got anything else on the National Space Council?
No, that's about it. I mean, like I said, we're just waiting on the administrator announcement, because that's going to be a major part of NSPOC. But right now it's sort of, this is our big announcement, and we're just lying in wait as things fall into place. And as Congress comes back from recess next week, we're going to see NASA's budget move forward and see if NSPOC has any sort of any sort of pull on that budget.
Cool. All right, cool. So moving on to international news, we have an anomaly that occurred on a launch pad for the Chinese launch vehicle Long March 5, the country's premier heavy lift rocket. So yesterday, well, by the time you guys are listening to this, this will be on July 2nd, so Sunday. The launch of a Chinese communications satellite ended in failure when the rocket carrying the probe somehow malfunctioned during flight. Now, it's still unclear exactly what happened to the Chinese Long March 5 heavy lift rocket, but shortly after the flight, China's official press agency, Xinhua, simply reported that an anomaly occurred, which could mean anything, but an anomaly occurred during launch, and that there would be an investigation into the problem. So they're not exactly sure what happened, but some clues seem to indicate that the issue may have started in the main core of the rocket. A plume of gas was seen around the main engines of the vehicle about 6 minutes into the flight. And it was only the second launch of this particular type of rocket. So there's many questions right now about about the future of China's space program. There's a ton of speculation if you go looking this article up on the internet. I don't think it's going to be, the end of the world. But China did have, the end of the world for China, or the end of the space program for China. But China did have big plans for this vehicle. So the Long March 5 is it's one of the most powerful rockets in the world, and it nearly matches the capability of the U.S.'s Delta IV Heavy. So I'm anxious to see where China goes with this. I'm sure they're going to have I think what's going to happen is they're going to have a major effort to basically assess the problems with the Long March 5, identify any fixes, and move forward. But this is a big bottleneck. The next flight of the Long March 5 is supposed to go to the moon for them, and send 2 modules to the lunar surface, one to collect samples and another to return samples to Earth. And that mission was tentatively scheduled for November of this year. But Sunday's failure makes that timeline uncertain. So we're gonna have to see where China decides to go with this.
I mean, I remember us talking at the beginning of the year that China was, this emerging space power, and I think it still is, but it's been having a lot of organizational troubles. I mean, getting a new administrator of their space program kind of out of the blue. And then also this failure of the Long March 5 sort of throw monkey wrenches into the existing operation. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next. If they make any announcement about the next Long March 5 moving from November to another date, or if they're going to sort of remain in secrecy and sort of move schedules around behind closed doors and then make, last minute announcements like they have previously.
Right. Okay. So we'll see where that goes. Just a couple of other quick stories for you this week. So latest in tech, DARPA's Excite mission. So DARPA's Excite mission is supposed to demonstrate an ability to build a satellite bus, like a biological cellular system. And by cellular, it's supposed to use satellites to form a unique bus around a payload for communications, such as a sensor. Because each satellite has all the necessary systems to function in space, they provide a form of redundancy in the event that there's some sort of failure among any single satellite. Each of these satellites could make a satellite bus anywhere from a few tens of kilograms to 2,000 to 3,000 kilograms. And this is a program that was part of DARPA's original Phoenix program for servicing satellites, but it's now been sort of broken off into a separate program. And sort of the big news this week is that because of delays with its original launch on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is trying to launch this Excite experiment, small satellite mission on a polar satellite launch vehicle from India. So speaking at MilSatCom USA conference on June 29th, the program manager within DARPA TTO, the Tactical Technology Office, Jerry Palmer, said that the agency is now pursuing a launch opportunity with the Indian Space Research Organization. So this is just them taking advantage of what seems to be timeline and availability of an Indian rocket. They're going to try to launch Excite aboard an Indian PSLV rocket in the early half of FY 2018. So
yeah, I mean, speaking of emerging space powers, India has, I guess, I mean, even since the last 2 episodes of Ad Astra, has become a potential DARPA launching vehicle.
Yeah. I mean, they're just providing the launch. I'm sure this is something where the actual experiment and payload are likely kind of segregated off, and India's literally just providing the vehicle, which it's fine. It would be nice to see SpaceX supply it, to be able to supply a launch apparatus for DARPA. SpaceX, an American company, but if that's not capable, I see no problem with them going to ISRO. I mean, that also helps relations with between countries as well. Yeah.
And also gives us a foothold in an area that is going to be very key geopolitically speaking. I mean, with China right over the border, having an ally, a space ally in India will be integral if tensions between the U.S. and China rise.
Absolutely. So on to our last story, and this will be our coming soon to space section. So to date, Jack, how many people have traveled to space?
Isn't it like 530 something?
536.
Ooh,
you were very close. Good job. So Dylan Taylor, a space industry angel investor and space news columnist, is eager to share the experience with 10,000 people through his nonprofit organization, Space for Humanity. And basically what this organization right now is doing is soliciting nominations through its website for people from diverse backgrounds to travel to space or near space and return to Earth to serve as ambassadors who can share their experiences. Which is, I mean, it's a cool concept. The whole idea behind this organization is, and this is a quote from Dylan Taylor, was, "We are not going to send multimillionaire white males who can afford to go." What they want is for people to come back and talk about their experience, whether it's someone who lives in New Delhi and makes $1 a day, or someone who lives in New York City. They want people from all across the board to be able to embrace space travel and space tourism once we get to the point where we can actually have everyday normal citizens going. They actually, in this article on spacenews.com, it shows that they're actually considering purchasing rides for participants in Worldview Enterprises' high altitude balloon and Blue Origin's New Shepard suborbital vehicle, because both will give diverse participants a group experience. Taylor and a group of donors can't necessarily yet name a plan to provide Space for Humanity with initial funding of $10 million over 24 months. But that is their goal. They don't actually have a name for that plan yet, but they want to shoot for $10 million over the next 2 years, and they believe that successful missions and showing the benefits of pulling citizens up into space will help raise additional funding. So pretty cool effort by Dylan Taylor. I think that's something that's a very meaningful a meaningful sort of mission to go after is embracing diversity, just in terms of being able to give people of all class levels in society a chance to view space. Now, how they're actually going to pick those people, I'm not sure, but but I mean, I think it's like most nonprofits, his heart's in the right place. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before, both on air and off air. That space right now, at least the commercial side, is kind of this billionaire boys club where all the astronauts are going to be, millionaires. And even under SpaceX's, Elon's plan, the interplanetary transport system, that it's still going to cost, $250,000 to get a ticket on the spacecraft to go to Mars. That's not affordable for someone who works a minimum wage job or is working class in the heartland. I mean, it is still very, I mean, the space field is very segregated in terms of access to space. I think this nonprofit is going to be not only trying to solve that directly, but also elevates the status of that issue, which is going to be, that needs to be something that we address.
I know, I don't want to dump on Musk or Blue Origins or any of those groups. That is the price of them repeatedly and truly reliably sending people into space while gaining some profit. It's not that it takes $2, but they're charging millions. This is something that to do this reliably and efficiently is going to cost a lot of money. However, I think this person's group recognizes that is sort of a symptom of the difficulty with which it takes to send people up into space, and that he's recognizing the problem right away in a way that we would have never done 20 years ago, not just 60 years ago, 20 years ago, and is actually trying to address it before it becomes a problem. I mean,
we have an opportunity to address that issue early on, which is only going to help us later.
For all there is left to fight for, this is actually showing how our society has moved forward. And shout out to this guy Dylan Taylor. I think this is a great endeavor, and I'd even be willing to donate. So, all right,
you got it. Let's include in the show notes. There's going to be a link to the Space News article, which I'm sure has a link to where you can donate.
Yep, probably. We should find that out before. But anyway, you got anything else this week, Jack?
Nope. I mean, coming soon to space. The Future Space Leaders Conference is coming up on July 13th. But in terms of other things going on, it's sort of this waiting game for the administrator announcement.
Okay, sounds good. So once again, sorry if you guys heard any humming in the background. I am just getting my audio equipment set up at my new place, and Jack is, where are you recording from right now?
I am currently recording in a very nice house down in South Carolina, Hilton Head Island.
Gotcha. So, sorry for any feedback you hear from either of our recording locations. We are not in a normal place right now. So
that is both a note for our listeners and for you, Tom.
Yes. All right. So ready to wrap it up?
Yeah. So if there's nothing else, as always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton
at Astro.